Now, in the Mangala Sutta we just recited, in one of the verses near the end, it said, when one is touched by the worldly states, one's mind is not, excited. Anybody remember that verse, that line? Mind untouched by worldly states. So what are these worldly states? Yes, but there's a specific meaning to that. It's said to be the 8 worldly dhammas, or the 8 worldly conditions. Sometimes it's called the 8 worldly winds. And those are basically the opposites of gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, fame and ill repute, or defame. So, these 8 worldly states are which drive the minds of, people, because when they get gain, like you win a lottery or whatever, or get a good job, you get elated, right? But then when you lose it, you feel down, you get down. So people are constantly, going back and forth between gain and loss, whether it's gain, material gain, or some other kind of, gain. Maybe you, lose weight and then you gain it back. That's just one example. Anyway, gain and loss. So this is what affects the average person. They're all about gaining and then losing. So the mind is affected by that greatly. And then pleasure and pain, because we already kind of know about pleasure and pain, right? So when you have pleasurable feelings, you're happy and so on, but when you get the painful feelings, the mind gets pulled quickly out of that. And then praise and blame. So when people get praised, oh, you're such an intelligent person, or you're so beautiful, or you're so whatever it might be, praise. But then other people are going to blame you. And we can see this in, in worldly life, all these people that, were praised at one time, now they get blamed. And then a similar counterpart is the getting, famous, and then, going down the tube. So there's a lot of people that became famous, and then some skeleton gets pulled out of their closet from, 20 or 30 years ago, and all of a sudden their reputation, takes a hit. So these are called the 8 worldly winds, because they're constantly blowing people back and forth in all kinds of ways. So, of course, in meditation practice, we learn to develop equanimity, so that we don't get elated when we get the gain, and we don't get sorrow or delated, when we get it lost. The mind, knows that all these things are possibilities. Doesn't mean you can't enjoy gain, but to know that it can be taken away in a finger snap, and not to, let it crush you. And then the same with, of course, pleasure and pain. If you have pleasant sensations in meditation, it can change very quickly to pain. You try to keep your mind in the middle. So we talked about the mind in the middle is mindfulness, or it's the meaning of meditation. And then the praise and blame, and the fame and ill repute also. So Anybody have anything to add to that or debate that? How many have seen all these whirly winds even in their own life, some way or another? Maybe not the fame and ill fame, I don't know. But certainly praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, because they can be taken away so fast. Okay. So, there's been a lot of famous yoga teachers and even some monks who, got famous for being, great teachers, and then they find out they got involved in some scandals, and they quickly lost their fame. For those of us who have been born in Western countries, do you think there is more conditioning than those who grow up in Buddhist cultures? I don't think there's, more conditioning, because conditioning is conditioning, but there's probably more things and, freedom of so many kind of choices in the Western countries. Now this was true, 40, 50 years ago. Now Eastern countries, almost everything's available, even in Buddhist countries, and all the stuff like that. But even Buddhists are conditioned, to go to the temples and offer flowers. It's a good conditioning, but it's still conditioning, right? But in the West, the conditioning, because this idea of, training, nowadays, you're not even supposed to, spank your child or even, speak to them roughly. Oh, sweetie, sweetie, And back in the day, in my day, you hit with a belt if you do something wrong, and all kind of punishment, and it wake kids up. Now they're too permissive. They don't want to obey anybody, and so of course all that's debatable as to whether that's good or bad, and even that is conditioning. So those are people born in my generation, the baby boomers. They're probably in favor of those traditional ways of training their kids. They get in arguments with their grandkids who are now raising their great grandkids, and so permissive, and letting them do anything they want, and so on. So, but we had a lot of negative conditioning to overcome. But still, I don't, conditioning is conditioning. But the main thing is whether it's good conditioning or that conditioning leads to, like breaking precepts, like the conditioning to use vulgar language. So we learned that as a kid in this country, and of course people do frown on it, but everyone uses it anyway, right? And they tell lies, and they so rampant. Cheat people, even all these businesses and so on, and telling lies even about medical products and tobacco products, saying, oh, there's no harm in that, and, just for profits. So in the Buddhist countries, there may not be so much of that kind of thing, because people are aware of the precepts and the karma, more. So perhaps there would be a bit less of that. We'd hope so, but what do you think? We should ask our Buddhist friends here who grew up in the Buddhist countries. about it. Do we need heart chakra, third eye chakra, other chakras open to make good progress in meditation? This person reads too many books. This idea of chakras is not really mentioned as such, especially in Theravada Buddhism. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, they do mention chakras to some extent, but in yoga, it's more highly developed. The system of yogi physiology and chakras are connected with certain emotional centers, and usually they're connected with nerve groupings in the plexi. And these nerve groupings in different places, like the Muladhara chakra and the second, third chakra, normally fourth chakra is connected with like the heart and the beginning of love and compassion. But now the chakras aren't mentioned as such in the Theravada tradition, but those qualities can still affect one. And usually it says, when somebody their mind is in their first chakra, that means they're just interested in food, sex, and sleep. And somebody who's, and they get blocked, the chakra energy can't rise up above that. And so they're locked into that. Everything they do, or much of their life, is centered around, those three kind of things. And then the second chakra is, I don't know the exact kind of emotions they're connected with, but the third chakra is more of a kind of a fiery state, more activity and so on. Well, in yoga they call them tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. Are usually connected. Like tamasic, people would be locked in their first or second chakras, and rajasic, getting into the third chakra, more active. And then the heart chakra, and then the chakra in the fifth chakra is said to be concentration. So, in meditation we practice these things. Now, a beginner in meditation, when their mind is still plagued by all kind of hindrances, including sensual desire, and they have these lustful thoughts arising in their mind, because they might do that in daily life, and it comes up as thoughts in meditation. That means that's sort of connected with your mind is down there, right? And then gradually, when you overcome that and weaken the hindrances and so on, and then you start like practicing metta and compassion, and then it's said to be, then your heart chakras, say to open. We don't use that terminology, but there's some truth to it. And then the throat chakra, the fifth chakra, is said the beginning of concentration, like to attain jhana. If you can attain first jhana, that means you've even gone beyond the emotion of love and so on, and you've attained concentration. And then the sixth chakra is, probably the sort of the more transcendental awareness. So it's connected with wisdom and maybe even the higher jhanas than just the first one. And then the seventh one is said to be the liberation. So like arahants and so on would be having their energy, consciousness freed from all of those kind of things. Anyway, that's just a kind of very basic analogy. But so normally, in Theravada we don't talk about those, but just the practice of the Dhamma, practicing precepts helps you to get out of the lower chakras, and then as you practice dana and generosity and then metta, then that means your consciousness is kind of rising up, like seeing and feeling, craving and grasping. Seeing, feeling, or feeling those craving and grasping clearly is almost painful. Can you please offer some examples on becoming? Well, craving, I talked about this the other day. So craving, grasping, and becoming. Becoming is, reacting to the object of your grasping. So your grasping is simply the mental intention and the mental activity directed toward either something you want to get or something you want to get away from, generally, mostly. So, so they're directly connected. And as I mentioned, you can't really prevent craving because craving is so deeply rooted even in the cellular, or you could say even atomic structure of our cells. Let's say of course, the sexual craving, right? So it's very strong, and it's rooted in our, organs, their memory. They have their own craving. And we think it's in our mind, but it's a lot of the body too. So it's not easy to get out of. It's not like you can just deny yourself to eat a chocolate bar or something. If you have a craving for some kind of food or something, you can kind of do it or not do it, but those other ones are very, very deep rooted. That's why they only get eliminated in the stages of enlightenment. The greed and hatred. That's why they're only weakened even in the second stage, and then only totally overcome in the third stage. And even jhana, attaining jhanas doesn't eliminate them. The jhanas simply temporarily suppress the desire for those things, but when you come out of the meditation, then those things can come back quite easily, and sometimes very strong. There's examples of monks in Japan, like Zen monks. I don't know how many people have read some Zen stories and so on, but sometimes they go on retreat, for a week or two, and doing this intensive meditation. And a lot of it is just concentration meditation. And at the end of the retreat, they go to the geisha houses and get drunk and drink alcohol. So there was even a meditation center I go to in Hamburg, near Hamburg, Germany. A meditation center. I've been teaching retreats here since 1988, almost every year. Until before the pandemic. And they had some Zen courses there too, because they invited teachers from different traditions. So they had some, Tibetan practitioners, even some other types, and this Zen. And so the manager of the course was telling me, even these Westerners who follow this Zen tradition, on the last day of the retreat, they'd bring out a case of beer. So that's an example of this. They suppress these desires, in the meditation retreat, just through the intense practice and concentration. But then afterward, then all these things came up, and they just followed the thing. I mean, that's a Zen tradition, but Theravada tradition, of course, is different in that respect. So, the examples of becoming is basically any action that you do. If you think about it and then you do it, that means you just strengthen the habit. So the habit means every time you repeat a habit, it strengthens those neural pathways in your brain and also in the cells, the memory of that. When it's craving for food, your stomach might, used to sweets, so you got a craving. It could be partly physical there too. And addictions, like heavy drug addictions, right? I mean, that's physical. It's kind of a physical thing. And so, they're very, very difficult to get rid of them once you get those, like heavy drugs, right? Opiates and all that. So, the becoming means basically, and that's the fuel, because the last moment of death is the most important. The strength of your desires and aversions and memories at the time of death is what is going to condition where that mind will be attracted to in the next life. So that's why, a major focus of the practice of, meditation and the Eightfold Path is to try to at least reach the stage of a stream enter, so you would be guaranteed not to be born in the lower realms. So for those who are not familiar with this, how many people are not familiar with these kind of rebirth in Buddhism? Or these stages? So anyway, I don't want to bore you with all these details, but so if you attain stream entry, that means you overcome or destroy these three fetters of belief in a self that I mentioned yesterday, belief in a self, attachment to rites and rituals, and what's the third one? Belief in the self. Doubts. Okay. So it is said that attainment is strong enough to wipe out thousands of lifetimes of karma. Because if you don't attain stream entry, your mind could keep on going through the rounds of birth and death, as I mentioned last night, the external one, the internal one too, indefinitely. But with the attainment of stream entry, it is said that you wiped out, because of that overcoming the belief in a self is so powerful, the delusion of it is so powerful, and now you overcome it to a certain extent and overcome doubts and have some understanding of Dhamma. That's so powerful that even if you were very negligent, you wouldn't be reborn more than 7 times. So you've gone from indefinite number of possible rebirths by not doing anything to, at the most, 7. And that's if you were really negligent. And then the second one is the once returning. By weakening 90%, let's say 80, 90%, you weaken greed and hatred to the extent that, you have to push your buttons quite a lot to arouse any greed or anger or hatred. Then that's you wipe out another 6 rebirths, and you only be reborn one time more as a human being. But even a Sotapanna would not be born in the lower realm, could not be born as an animal or in the hell realms or as a hungry ghost. Now, I'm just saying this to kind of correlate how, it depends on the strength of the defilements in the mind as to what, kind of where the mind is going to go. And then only attaining that. And even the never returner has those 5 higher fetters that I mentioned today in that story about the boat, the raft, having to avoid the submerged branches. And so, that's the becoming. And attaining jhana, let's say if you mastered the 4 jhanas, or even 1 jhana, if you're able to, you practice jhana every day and able to attain it almost immediately, close your eyes and within, 5 or 10 seconds be in the first jhana and stay there for, a half a day or a full day, or at will you could go in and out of it. That's called mastery. If you die in that jhana, you'd be reborn in one of these Rupa jhana realms, where there's just, they don't have bodies, like basically it's just a kind of a body of light and so on. And the lifespan is very long. So anyway, that's the becoming. That's because of the becoming. You programmed your mind to become reborn in those realms. And the same with the other jhanas, they all have their own realm. And so on. So, but only if you've mastered those things. That means you programmed your mind. And so it's become, you become in a certain direction. So that's the meaning of becoming. But it could be just any regular habit. Like if you practice yoga every day, then you're developing, your muscles are becoming, your body is becoming something else. It's becoming flexible. Or your health might become better, because that's what yoga does. It helps get everything working properly and overcome things. So like that, in the becoming. But it's not going to just happen by itself. You've got to do the work, but you have to know what is the result of what you're doing, and what is the benefit of what you're doing, or what is the demerit of what you're doing. But people are not afraid. They don't believe in becoming. So they'll just go out and do anything they want. Hurt other people, or destroy their mind with drink and drugs because they're under the grip of these powerful drugs. And their life is going to become miserable. As we can see, people become alcoholics, they go drug addicts. I mean, it's a terrible problem. Now they're committing suicide, overdosing, all kinds of things. Terrible problem. Big problem. Simply because they haven't done the proper becoming. They've done the becoming that leads downwards. And so in Dhamma practice, we're creating the becoming, doing the becoming, that hopefully is going to, take the mind more upwards. You mentioned sound is material vibration, thoughts are mental vibration. How about time? Some people said they meditated for hours, but only felt like 10 minutes or so. Is time perception any kind of vibrations? Well, time, as we've already talked about, the past and the future, let's say, are based on desire and aversion, or pleasure and pain. And so, so we're waiting for something to happen. We're wanting a pleasurable feeling to come in the future. So we're waiting. And of course, now, but all there is in reality is the present moment. Even the thought of the future is a thought in the present moment, right? But where is the future? You got to wait for it to come. But that is, because the sun revolves around, the earth revolves around the sun, we got night and day, and then they divided that into, for other purposes, of time, hours. Scientists have to do something, so they, have that, invent all these things like clocks and time and this time and that time and all kind of things. But that's just for kind of, surviving in the world, right? In the prehistoric day, they got up with the sun because, the light, you had to go out and hunt animals, and nighttime they get tired, they come back and sleep. They didn't have electric lights then, so everything was dark. And the body was made for that. This human body was made as a daytime creature. And that's why people that work night shifts, they get messed up. And their systems get kind of messed up with. Because the body wasn't made for that, staying awake the whole night and the sleeping in the daytime. So anyway, this idea of time. Now when you're meditating, you're hoping for the future. Now if you got pain in the body, you're hoping that it goes quickly. But if you were having a good meditation, you want not to end. You want to go more slowly, right? And you think, I hope it doesn't ring the bell. I'm almost in samadhi. I want to go for another 30 minutes. So, most of our thoughts about the past and the future and time are based on these, phenomenon, as I said, pain and pleasure in the past and the future. So we're creating time. And so you're not thinking. That's why time is just created in the mind. That's why you can, if you're in a deep samadhi, you could be in there for some hours and come out, and it's like time, it was just, as I said, just 10 or 15 minutes or whatever. And the same with sleep. If you lay in bed at night and you're tossing and turning and you can't go to sleep because of whatever, your sickness, or maybe just your agitation or worry or whatever thoughts, you can't sleep, then the night's very long, right? But if you have a really deep, profound sleep, where you may not even wake up at all, you wake up and it's like you just went to sleep hardly a little bit ago. So that itself is kind of some kind of, telling you something, some example of that. And that's why in some of the very highest meditation states, like Nirodha Samapatti, there's a state called Nirodha Samapatti, which is even beyond that 8th formless jhana that I mentioned yesterday. The cessation of feeling and perception, where basically all the brain functions get, silent. They'd probably redline an EEK machine, but they're not dead. And they can't stay in the state more than 7 days or their body would die because of just hardly functioning. But it stays alive enough that there's still enough body warmth so the heart and the blood, still kind of is circulated, and they're not going to die anyway, up to 7 days. So that's why when somebody goes into that state, they have to tell somebody. They have to tell somebody what's happening. Otherwise, people might think they're dead and carry them to the morgue or throw them on a funeral pyre. I think there were some examples of that happening. You're saying there's a lot of, strange things goes on when the mind enters these very deep states of, concentration and so on. In fact, if you want to hear a funny little story, not a funny, but it's a story in the text, that there was a monk who attained Nirodha Samapatti. He was sitting out in the forest. And some robbers came by and thought he was dead. And so they put him on a funeral pyre and burned his body. But it said when the mind is in that state, you can't be destroyed by fire. And so these robbers burned this body. They thought they had burned it. They probably set it on fire and then they left, and presuming the guy was going to be dead, right? Then the next day they saw the guy in the marketplace. They got shocked. And his body wasn't, destroyed by that. So that's a story you read in the text. Whether you believe it or not is another thing. But there's a lot of, things that we can't understand. Like normal physics can't understand that, And that's why they don't believe a lot of that stuff. They have to have it proven true, right? They have to put it in a test tube before they accept if it's true or not.
What do you think of a lot of monks, Tibetan monks, they're going through this, the science is trying to study them, like the chromosomes, them, they're trying to define all the stages.
Yeah, they are doing that kind of research, and it is interesting, and because they can measure the brain waves and brain activity. That's how they're doing that, and so they're just, that's what they know is just the brain is producing color in this part. That means they're thinking this and thinking that and doing, So, but that's all done by machine, and we don't necessarily know what's in the actual mind. We're assuming these things, and much of it is very well might be true. So we're not saying that.
And
So if it gets them to realize that, wow, there's something to meditation, these guys can go into samadhi, and then you can, put a hot coal on their arm and they won't flinch or something like that, or they can raise their body temperature at will, or they can stop their heart for a while, yogis, and they've demonstrated these kind of things. But still, science, a lot of skeptics think it's all a magician's trick, and they want to deny that any of that is real, and so on. But Tulku is somebody who's been reborn. Yes. A boy that dies, and they find that the young boy in the next life, or 2 or 3 years old, in the village, and then they recognize, they do tests to see whether, like usually great monks, before they die, they leave some kind of clues about where they might be reborn, because rebirth is such a powerful belief in Tibetan Buddhism. And they want to find these tulkus because they're reincarnated over, so they believe they're very powerful people. They've been practicing spiritual practices for many lifetimes. Like Dalai Lama. They call him the 17th Dalai Lama, right? Or 14th? Or there's Karmapa was the 17th one. Anyway, yeah, 14th Dalai Lama. Why? Because they've traced that incarnation 14 lifetimes back. When that particular person, back in the 7th century or whatever, first became a monk, and then having gained some kind of mental power, they leave a little clue. Like they usually give them a test, the mug that they drank their tea in, or the mala that they use to count their mantras, or maybe some other article of clothing, those hats they wore, whatever, anything. Usually it's the mala they had, or the cup they used, or some ritual thing that they would have been using all the time. So when that old monk dies, they keep these things. And then 3 or 4 years later, people in the village, hey, there was a young boy born a couple of years ago, maybe he's that monk, I don't know. And so then they would bring that boy to the monastery where these articles were kept. And they wouldn't tell anybody, and they'd mix it up with articles of other monks. And most of the time, if it was a true tuku, he would point to that particular item that he knew was his in the last life. And that's how they determine, oh, this person is a real guy. The reincarnation. And so that's called a tulku. It's also called Rinpoche. Yeah.
What about these monks or developed people who can live hundreds of years because their bodies are so rarefied that it's basically sub-energy body?
Well, I don't know if any monks have lived hundreds of years. No, not hundreds of years, I don't think. I never heard of it. There's yogis like Babaji, so on. Yeah, those things, all these things, psychic powers that you read about in books, you should take it with a grain of salt. That not to deny it, because we don't know what the extent of the universe is very deep, but not to buy it hook, line, and sinker either. So with a grain of salt, it may be true. It may not be true. That way you won't be ridiculed when something that you said was true is now proven false, or something you said was false and now has been proven true. So it's best to keep this idea that it may be true, it may not be true. I don't have the power to determine that. So let it be. Let them believe what they want. We shouldn't ridicule them unless it's these conspiracy theories that are going on around, these things that are going around in the news, conspiracy theories saying that Martians have come down and did this or that. Okay, oh, you believe that, right? No. Okay, anyway, that's the best thing, It may be true, it may not be true. It's better not get into arguments about it, because no one's going to prove the other person wrong or right. Okay, friends. Any last questions? How many want to go out and do another outdoor meditation tonight? So if you're getting tired of that, or you don't want to, you're welcome to stay inside and do the meditation, in here with whoever wants to do it in here. And because when you go home, you may not have the right conditions, like to sit out and enjoy the nature on a warm summer night, and to meditate, feel those kind of vibrations. And in the morning, we probably will do the same thing sitting outside. That last morning, so here I can do that any time I want, but I know a lot of you who live in apartments or live in other neighborhoods where conditions are not so nice, or you don't have anybody else to do it with, to kind of, and then you don't always have that opportunity. You have a question, Henry?
Bhante, I have a question there. Once you mentioned that you can feel different sensations in one place, like 200 different sensations, and you separate them at different, so many different times. So maybe, when you feel sensations, yeah, like you're not that much different.
Well, they're different. I mean, I think you're referring to when I said once you gain concentration and the mind gets centered in the body and it's, stop, it's overcome its sleepiness and it's, very wide awake. And then you start to, you tune in deliberately, open up the awareness, like feel the outline of the body. Yeah, then you can feel all the, sensate hundreds basically at the same time if your mind is really still and focused, because on your head you can feel 4 or 5 at the same time, and all over the body. So, but you're not naming these, and you're not sort of deciphering them or thinking about them, and they last so quickly, you're not really paying attention much. They're just like a blip on a radar screen, just. Although some of them last a little longer, but even they seem to last, they're changing. So even something that seems to last is not lasting. It's continually changing. But we just don't see the individual because our mind is not developed enough. But anyway, yeah, you can feel those sensations. Is that what you meant, Henry? Yeah, I mean, it's cool, especially if you do the yoga and the deep breathing again, because you've activated and charged up the cells of the body with oxygen, so naturally they're more active. And the circulation is better, so you feel it's more alive. When you're all stiff and poor circulation, all you feel is pain. But there's more pleasant sensations in the body than probably pain, if we know how to feel them, if we get relaxed enough. Maybe I shouldn't say more, but anyway, at least a lot. And so once you start feeling those pleasurable sensations, then even that's the instruction, that you pay attention to them. Because that will help you not pay attention to the painful ones. So the more pleasant sensations you can feel, these little light kind of tingling sensations and just pulses of blood, they're very pleasant because they're very deep and it's very organic. It reminds you of what you went through in the womb for 9 months. That's all you knew in the womb for 9 months. Going from a 1-cell organism to a multi-billion cell organism, that's what you were feeling. And so it's very organic, it triggers, womb memories. Kind of like, that's why once in a while I've mentioned, after doing some yoga, I said, the same feeling that you had when you were in the womb. Anybody remember me saying that? Anyway, so maybe not the exact same feeling, but anyway, like that. So that's the thing. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I have people do the yoga for that specific reason, to hopefully try to feel more sensation and the pleasant sensations that come when the cells have been charged up with oxygen, and the blood is flowing through all the joints and things like that. And then that gives the pleasant sensation that then you can focus on, and that takes you, deeper into that. And so the painful ones, they may come up, but because the mind is tuned into these pleasant ones, they're not affecting you so much as if your mind was just distracted and, getting really distracted by the pain. And that's why you can endure it a lot longer. Yes.
And as we're tuning in those pleasant sensations, but we're careful not to grasp them, right? Be careful not to try to hold on to the pleasant sensation.
Well, you don't hold on to them, but I mean, the Buddha said these are blameless, pleasant sensations because they're natural. It's the sensations that lead you to rape, kill, pillage, and plunder, and lie, cheat, and steal. Those are the ones we don't want to latch on to. That's the whole point, because they don't cause suffering. And so, that's the main point. That's why the Buddha, he was practicing ascetic practices with those 5, yogi friends of his. Mortifying the body, sleeping on beds of nails, and, doing all kinds of things, starving themselves. They got really thin and sat out of the hot sun and to torture themselves in the heat, to expose themselves in a cold winter, cold, and thinking that these kind of things would allow them to transcend the flesh, because they thought the soul was imprisoned in the flesh. So by denying the flesh and torturing the body, it was somehow would liberate the soul. I mean, this was one of the kind of erroneous views that some of these heretical sects had at the time. The Buddha blamed them. Said these kind of beliefs, and so but then the Buddha realized he got so weak he couldn't meditate anymore. He said, "No, this can't be the way to enlightenment. This is not gonna, no." And so he started eating again, eating some food to get some strength back, because he could no longer hardly even sit up to meditate. He was so weak. And he said he could reach into his stomach and grab his spinal column. That's how thin he got. And there's some statues made. In fact, that one, that's the classic fasting Buddha statue, that one on the far right. You may not be able to see it clearly, but you can see all of its ribs and the gaunt face and so on. That's just a depiction of the Buddha in that state, emaciated state. And then he decided, no, that's not the way. Because those ascetics thought that any type of pleasure was no good. You had to deny any kind of pleasure. But the Buddha said no. And then he said, no, the pleasure of jhana is blameless. And that's why that piti and the sukha is the hallmarks of the first jhana. But then even those wear out as you gain the second and third and fourth jhanas to become more just equanimity. So it's the main thing, that jhana doesn't cause you to... Because when you're in a jhana like that, the last thing in your mind would be to have sex or go out and eat a pizza or stimulate any of your other senses. So those pleasurable feelings are blameless. But you can get too addicted to it that you don't want to come out, and you don't want to go out, and you neglect your duties. So there was a guy at Bhavana Society back in the 90s. He came there to do a self-retreat. Bhavana Society, West Virginia. So we had these kutis out in the forest. So this guy came there, he wanted to do the self-retreat. We didn't really know, who he was exactly or too well, and, he just told us he wanted to practice meditation. So this guy was practicing, some kind of meditation, to get into jhanas and, just try to stay absorbed in these jhanas. And then he got some idea in his head. He wanted to empty out the kuti. We had a bed and, maybe a desk and a chair and something in like the kutis. So without telling anybody, he put all that stuff outside. He didn't want anything in the kuti to distract him from attaining his jhana. So he put these things outside, and they slept on the floor. And then it rained. He didn't bother bringing them in, and it damaged those things. He didn't take responsibility. That's the danger of being absorbed in the jhana, that you don't want to come out, you don't want to be disturbed by anybody, and then you neglect your duties and cause a lot of problems for others. That's what is no good. Or, not is not good. So there is a danger of getting too addicted to that, if to the extent that you neglect your duties and make the life more difficult for others around you, that then have to go up and clean up after you, or keep coming around, say, come on, blah, blah, because we've seen that happen a lot. I don't know. I think he just disappeared one day when everything was outside, ruined by the rain, and that's how we knew it happened, because we didn't go out there to, want to disturb the guy, right? And then, he didn't show up after a day or two. What the heck, And then we went out there and we saw this. So, okay, I think we'll go ahead and get ready to, to go outside. Turn the air out. Suffer.